Alright everyone, hail and welcome to this week's episode of Midgard Musings. Thanks so much for tuning in and watching. This week is a kind of a continuation of the Deity Discussion series that I run once a month, but this week is part 2 of episode 4. Episode 4 was done last Sunday, and it was about Odin, and today we're doing the part 2 because got a lot of feedback from folks on the Facebook page about maybe doing a part 2 because there's just so much that we can cover in one video realistically, and there's a lot more to go over about the All-Father. So we're doing part 2 today. Like I said, this is a once-a-month series. Normally I do a once-a-month video on a specific deity in this series, but to introduce myself, my name is Jesse, and this is my channel. Thank you so much for watching. Get the formalities out of the way. If you haven't already, please become a subscriber. The subscribe button's right down here at the bottom of this video. And then once you do that, if you don't want to miss a video, you don't have to. If you just click the bell notifications, you'll be notified every time I upload new content. Down in the description box, there's going to be links to the Facebook page, the Instagram handle, how you can get Midgard Musings apparel through Teespring. There's a Yule special. The links are all down in the description. Be sure to check those out before you leave from watching the video. Share the video around. If you like it, give it a thumbs up. Give me some feedback down in the comments. So before we actually get started with the discussion, we're going to go ahead and light our incense and our candle, and then get to talking a bit more about Odin. So if you look up in the annotated card that you'll see up in the top portion of this video, you'll see, like I said, an annotated card that will be from last week's episode, so you can get caught up on that if you haven't already. And then there's a playlist on this channel that you can check out with all the other previous episodes and whatnot, different series that I run. So again, this channel is pretty much dedicated to Norse heathenry, Norse heathen topics, things that may catch my attention at any given point in time, plus the series types of things that I run here. So last week when we talked about Odin, we covered some basic things, a little bit of his history as far as where he comes from, his, some of the historical things that we know about him, and then the main point or the main push for this series specifically is to talk about the deity as in the aspect of how I understand the deity, and then get some feedback from everybody that watches. So we talked a bit about some of the things that Odin governs in terms of what he's looked upon as a god of, if you will. And he's a god of so many things. We talked a bit about his role as a god of war, poetry, and death, and magic, and things like that. And there's going to be some other things that we're going to be talking about this week. I did actually write some things down this time to sort of help in my references, because it's hard to keep things all up in here in this crazy head of mine. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting to note about what Odin can be sort of attested to or connected with a bit is this notion or this concept that he is a god of outlaws. The outlawed class, those that are Utengard, if you will. And it's an interesting thing to think about, and I had to think about it a bit myself. And in some of the sagas, I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. Why would Odin be considered a god of outlaws? Because that's generally considered something of a less than reputable term, right? If you've been outlawed from your tribe, if you've been outlawed from the community, it's because you've done something that is not good for the tribe, and therefore you need to be gone or you need to be exiled. So why is he considered a god of outlaws? Well, there's a couple of sagas, Egil's saga and the saga of Grettir the Strong. Those are just two sources that we know of that support this. Because we have examples of people who were exceptionally strong-willed warrior poets, if you will, in these sagas, that had, a bit of, I guess you could say, they were kind of against the established social norm, right, if you will. They kind of went against the grain. And then we also have instances of, I believe there's it's in either the late 12th or early 13th century, Saxo Grammaticus. All right, he, somewhere around that time, he, let me just look over my notes here. He, I can't even read my own handwriting, isn't that awful? He talks about Odin, or references a point in time, at least in his writings, where Odin was banished or exiled or outlawed from Asgard by the gods because they were pretty much tired of his less than exalted reputation among mankind and among humans. And they wanted him gone from Asgard because they didn't want their reputation. They didn't want they didn't want that to taint their reputation, having him around. And they banished him from Asgard for somewhere around 10 years or something like that. I think this is what Saxo Grammaticus writes. And Odin's a wanderer. We talked about this in last week's episode, that he wanders and he goes on these different journeys amongst men and some of the different realms. And his purpose for this, and his, I guess, push for this, is to seek knowledge and wisdom and things, and it's to basically it's a relentless search for things that can change or thwart the fate that he has been given. He doesn't settle for, like we talked about earlier, the social norm or the rules as they are given out, so to speak. He's always trying to break those rules or bend those rules to benefit him. And it's a relentless pursuit, right? It really doesn't matter what he does to gain the benefit that he seeks, right? So I can relate to that. I think a lot of us can, in the sense that sometimes we don't always like the cards that we're dealt, and we're always trying to, at least myself personally, I like to do what I can to sort of prepare myself for life's curveballs, if you will. The things that life throws at us, the things that we get tossed in our way that don't always sit well with us. We're trying to change those things that happen in ways that benefit us. It's probably the bigger part of human nature. So in that aspect, I think it makes sense to understand why the outlaw class, or those that have been exiled or kicked out of the community for different things, why Odin would appeal to them and why their actions would appeal to the Allfather himself. Because he is that way. He is always out, always wandering, always seeking. And then at given points in time, some of the later texts that we have, even and this is the 12th to 13th century when I refer to Saxo Grammaticus, is that this is after the Christianization of Iceland and then Northern Europe. So those influences and those writings that we have from that era, keep in mind that there's probably some heavy Christian influence brought in on that. But there's that possibility. There's that strong possibility that those that are outlawed and those that are kicked out of the community would be appealing to Odin, to want to work with or to want to give them their patronage to. So there's one interesting aspect of Odin that we didn't talk about last week that I wanted to bring up in this week. Another interesting thing is that we talked about how he's a god of magic and of shaman approach to this heathen path, which is not something that every heathen will do. It's not something that every heathen, I think, necessarily should do, because magic work and trying to work not just our own weird, but to work in the weird of the world around us to benefit us isn't something that everybody, I think, is geared to work with or should be doing, because again, historically speaking, you had certain members of the community, certain members of the tribes, if you will, or even those that were outside of the tribe. The Volvas, those who dealt with magic in a sense that weren't necessarily in the community within the inner yard. They were in Utengard, just to keep themselves kind of separate from the workings of the people in the community itself. They had that. They had not everybody dealt with the runes. Not everybody, and when it comes to rune work, we don't even have 100% sure evidence that runes were used as divination tools. But so anyways, the whole magical working of things and how Odin is associated with that. He has his different spirit animals, if you will. He has the Hugin and Munin, the thought and memory, and he has as two wolves, Geri and Freki. And I wanted to talk a bit about Geri and Freki and how they are described, and how they are, or why they are Odin's wolves. So we already know a bit. We talked a little bit last week about thought and memory, Hugin and Munin, and how these are the ravens that go out into the realms and bring back the news to relay to Odin about things that are going on, and how he fears for the return of thought, but that he fears more that memory won't return, and some of the meanings behind all that. But Geri and Freki, which are two words that can mean roughly the same thing, ravenous and greedy, I believe it's in Grimnismal that we hear about how Odin feeds these wolves the scraps of the table, because Odin himself doesn't eat. He doesn't need food to survive on. He lives on wine alone. And so the scraps of the table, or the food that is given to Odin to eat that he does not eat, he then gives to his two wolves. But we also hear about, I believe it's in the Poetic Edda, in what's the name of that poem? I wrote it down here somewhere. Helga Vida. Actually, you know what? Let me look at it, because it's right here in the Poetic Edda. Excuse me, guys. I'm going to just step out of frame of the camera there. Sorry about that. It's yeah. It's Helga Vida Hugensvana 1 in the Poetic Edda, where the two wolves, Geri and Freki, roam the battlefield to consume the fallen slain. Now that's an interesting thing too, because we know that Odin is the battle father. He's the war father, right? He's very active in being a part of the selection of the fallen slain, or at least his Valkyries are, that bring the fallen slain back to Valhalla to prepare for Ragnarok. But yet we also hear in one of these poems that his wolves roam the battlefield to eat the corpses of the fallen slain. So where that all fits is an interesting thing. I feel like that may be something that's, not all the fallen slain are chosen by Freya. Not all the fallen slain get the ones that Freya doesn't choose for Folkvogner. Those secondary fallen that get chosen to Valhalla. That there may be those who fall that yet are not chosen for either halls, and that end up becoming the food for Odin's wolves. Now, it's an interesting thing that these wolves are known as greedy and ravenous, and how Odin himself is a wild and furious character, or his how he is very he's wild and ravenous, if you will, greedy. He the things that he does are his approach is to get whatever he can get out of the situation, and it doesn't always mean that it's going to be in a fair way. It's malicious in a lot of ways. Odin as a war god is very, very different from, for instance, Tyr, who is also a war god, but Tyr is more focused on the results of things by use of law and justice and fairness, if you will. There has to be balance. or whereas Odin's more reckless in that sense, and that it doesn't have to be fair, it doesn't have to be right. He will incite fights and conflicts and wars with those who maybe wouldn't even want to be a part of it, but just to be the stirrer of the pot, if you will, just to bring in that sort of conflict, because there's a reason why Odin needs things done, and he's going to incite these wars and incite these conflicts amongst men for that purpose, So these are some things that I think are not always looked at when looking at Odin, because as heathens, when we come to this path, many of us, myself included, come to this path from a history of another religion or religious path. Myself, I come from a Christian background, right? Grew up in a Christian household and taught Christian values. So in the sense of wanting to find, and getting called to this path, in the process of transitioning from one to the other, it's almost like, we were outlawed in a way, because we probably have faced family members who want to shun us, right, or avoid us, or feel that our choice is wrong because it goes against the beliefs that they were brought up in and that they brought us up in. And so, and again, in a way, the whole outlaw thing, the whole approach of, or the view of Odin as being a god that appeals to the outlaw, makes, again, that part really makes sense to me, because we were kicked out, if you will. We maybe weren't accepted into our families, or at least not right away. And so we are seeking some sort of, we're seeking a direction. We're looking for things to go, and Odin is there as a figure that many of us in our, when we first come to this path, someone that we look to. But he is a god of many, many things. Like I said, this is something that I wanted to kind of cover in this part, because I didn't feel like there was a whole lot of that part of Odin gone into, last week's episode. We talked in the episode last week about how to be cautious and to be, careful a bit when it comes to working with Odin, because of his nature and how it can be very one-sided. But he does give a lot to those who are willing to sacrifice much, because again, his angle is to be relentless and to be unforgiving, if you will, in the ways and in the methods that things are obtained for the betterment of not just himself, but for his tribe. Because you got to look and see how, as being the ruler of Asgard and the chief of the Aesir, he wants to defy that fate of Ragnarok, where he is killed by Fenrir. He wants to do everything he can to be the victor and to be the one who wins, even though it's fated for him to not. So I guess what I'm trying to say, guys, is that in our pursuits as heathens, and in our pursuits of becoming better individuals and bettering our community, understand that it can sometimes take us doing things that may go against what other people would say as being the right way, or the good way, or the noble way. Sometimes you just have to fight a little dirty. Sometimes you have to play a little dirty for the betterment of your tribe. Now, I don't say that you should be out here doing things that are going to be of detriment to yourself, or detrimental to those around you that you care for and that you love. But just realize that you love your inner yard, love and care for the community that you are connected to and are a part of. Those that are outside of that, if there's trickery, if there's mischief that needs to be thrown into the mix to better your community and to better your tribe, be careful with that, but realize that that's definitely something that can be done, because Odin himself uses these tactics. He's a relentless warrior god, if you will. So anyway, that's the episode for today. I hope you liked it. Let me know what you think about this episode in the description and all the other episodes if you've gotten a chance to watch them. Leave your comments down below. And then, like I said, if you haven't already, right up here, you're going to see that floating Midgard Musings logo. Click on it. Once you do that, you're a subscriber to the channel. Click the bell for notifications so that way you're notified every time I upload new content here on the channel. And then you'll also see over here some related content that you should be checking out as well on this channel. We're going to continue a series. We're going to continue the theme this month about Odin because we're approaching the Yule season, and so probably next week's video is going to be a video about Yule. So thank you guys so much for watching. Everybody that's watching live on Facebook, stick around so I can check the comments. Appreciate all your support. Hail and thank you. See you next week's video.